you just can't see which way is the best path out. You just know that you can't stay where you are. In some ways, being comfortable with the idea that you're going to try something and not know where it will lead. Being a lawyer doesn't have to involve being miserable, because so many of the lawyers that were in my network just accepted that they were going to have a headache at the end of the day, that they were always going to be stuck behind a desk and not doing enough of the things they enjoyed doing. Seeing that that was actually possible was a huge part in terms of me keeping on going.
It's very much about surrounding yourself with the tribe, isn't it? I think if you can find that tribe of people, then it becomes a bit easier, doesn't it, to make the decisions that you feel like you have to make, but sometimes aren't always strong enough to make them by yourself.
There's a thing about change management. When you don't have enough faith that you can change, if you're surrounded by people, you can borrow their faith for long enough for it to become something that you actually start to see.
Yeah. Does it feel like your relationship with success has changed, how you define success?
It absolutely did. I'm much healthier, I'm much happier. I did have to come to terms with the fact that what suits me is something different, and that this is enough.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Outlaws podcast. Today we're really excited to share with you our first Outlaws Diary, our special episodes where we go beyond the highlight reel. These are raw, real conversations with people who've stepped off the expected path and into something that feels more like home. These episodes just aren't about the shiny endpoint. They're about the wobble before the leap, the moments of doubt, the conversations you have with yourself at 2 a.m. The messy middle of doing what feels right, even when everyone else thinks you've lost the plot. Now, while Katie's off in Europe, walking through beautiful Italian villages with her husband and reflecting on our own next steps, I'm here holding down the fort. I miss her, and yes, I'm only slightly jealous. Today we're going to hear from Fiona McLay, once a litigation lawyer, now a legal tech evangelist and author. She couldn't have imagined when she started her career at Reinvention that she would end up where she has. This is her story. It's about what it took to walk away from the familiar, what she learned in the in-between, and how she built something more aligned, more honest, and more hers. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Outlaw Diaries. Thanks for coming on, Fiona. We're really excited to have you, and we can't wait to hear a little bit more about how it is that you left what it was that you thought was the career that was going in the right direction and then redefined it. So welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
I was reading your website a little bit earlier, and there was a couple of quotes on there that I really liked. You talked about, I think, one of your clients inviting you to a seminar about, was it in relation to thriving in the workplace?
It was, yeah.
And you went there and perhaps that wasn't what you felt like was happening for you?
And I still really remember that workshop as being, it's funny, you don't know sometimes what's going to deliver the message that you need to get at a particular time. But I think that workshop was a case where they had collected a whole lot of people talking about what it was like to be working in a values-led business, and talking about how it wasn't legal, it was all sorts of business, but just talking about what that looked like, how you could have a human-centric business and be profitable and successful. And it was just it was like they were speaking some foreign language for every discussion I'd ever had in a legal workplace. I'd always been in very traditional firms, and the ideas of values, and they were talking, some of them were retail businesses, but that's become a lot more common for people to be committing to a purpose. But back then it was something I hadn't even heard of, and I was blown away by the research of how much of a difference it had made to some of those businesses.
So tell us a little bit about your background. How was it that you found yourself sitting in that workshop that day?
Yeah, I started out as a litigation lawyer by accident. I didn't get the marks to get into law, and then in first year of university I did economics, and I happened to do well enough there and the only subject that I had liked in economics was a subject called commercial law. And so I decided to transfer and move into law. I just didn't I really found the statistics in economics quite difficult. And my mother had been a solicitor. I got through law school and I got a job in a big firm, and they had a rotation system. And I went into litigation as the first rotation, and then into a different area of construction litigation, the second area. And the people had been nicer to me in the first rotation. And so I went back there. And so all my dreams of being a commercial and a collaborative and a sort of constructive sort of person just went out the window, and I became a litigation lawyer. We did a lot of medical negligence. We did a lot of personal injury work. And I found that work absolutely fascinating. I loved all the people and getting to the bottom of those stories, and getting to dig into different areas and find out, what should a brain surgeon have done, or what should a road engineer have done so that the road worked. And so I loved it. And it was a really nice group of people. I ended up working with them at that firm and then at another firm for about 12 years. But I then thought I wanted to work more with the person who was writing the checks rather than be working for corporates. And so I went to a smaller firm and again got really good work, really interesting clients. And out of that, I started a lot of shareholder disputes. And that was sort of how I came to have these clients who were setting up this fledgling business, running this thriving workshop. It certainly came to me as a message that I think I needed to hear at that time.
And so do you feel like that was like, do you recall that in your mind as the sort of pivotal moment, or do you feel like it was sort of a slow creep and then?
There were no pivotal moments. When you look back, you sort of can see the dots that came to be, but at the time, I remember going to a financial planner and saying, how I've just got to hang on till I can retire. How long will that be? And I'm like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life if I've retired? Maybe it would be better if I found some work that I actually like to do for the next 30 years. And so that was one point. And so then I was like, instead of this whole, oh, well, I'll just keep on going till the mortgage is paid off and then I'll fall in a heap. I set about thinking, I actually maybe have to find something else. I found that the structure in the traditional law firm just hadn't really worked for me. I didn't feel that I was having enough impact as a younger lawyer of assuming that if I did good work, that would somehow get recognised and good things would happen to me. But in fact, I just worked a lot and I didn't have a profile. I didn't have a lot of options. I didn't have a client base, so it was hard to move to another firm. Okay, right. Well, I'll just leave law. But I couldn't really work out what I wanted to do, and also I'd spent so long working as a lawyer, and it seemed a shame to throw all of that away. And the tech thing was almost an accident.
Lawyer is such an identity. Kate and I have talked about that. She sort of says that's a soundbite, and people say, what do you do? And you go, I'm a lawyer. And they go, oh, okay, and they move on to the next question. I guess it's like lots of professions, nurse, doctor, I don't know, those kind of easy, everyone understands what they are. And there's a lot of identity also that goes with being that. And so when you think, I no longer want to be that's quite difficult, because it opens up the question of, well, what then? And how?
I really struggled with that and I'm sort of telling this story, but that was sort of 3 years of just trying to think this. I don't think this is working. I don't know what else to do. I'll keep on doing this and I'll apply for jobs, and oh, that's not working. Oh, you know what I mean? It's never just as simple as, oh, I woke up one day, I don't want to be a lawyer. It was a whole lot of things accumulating, and I was really unhealthy. I was not managing the stress very well. There were a whole lot of things that were not. This life was not working. Was not suiting me.
There were signs everywhere. Again, we talk about that, that there's these tappings on the shoulders and we ignore them for a period of time. You can ignore them for a while, can't you? But then they grow and maybe it turns into health problems or bigger problems. And then you go, oh, I have to do something. But I think it's really useful to talk about that stage of, those 3 years maybe for you where you were trying to figure it out, because I think as professionals, we often think that we can quickly solve problems, right? We're like, okay, well, I don't want to do that anymore, so let me just do that and let me solve what that problem is. But it doesn't happen that quickly, and there's a whole process that you have to go through, I think, to make some of those decisions, and it's not necessarily quick. And there's so many struggles that you have to go through, and it's really messy and a bit yuck.
I got this book out of the library, and it was about reinventing your career, written by a career coach, and she talked about being in the desert of reinvention, and that just really resonated with me because you just can't see which way is the best path out. You just know that you can't stay where you are, and she said you have to just take the next best step and keep trying things and trust that one of these things will work out. And she sort of gave you some advice about how to set things up to it, to equip yourself to survive that. But in some ways, being comfortable with the idea that you're going to try something and not know where it will lead, that also for somebody who'd been on a traditional law path and you got a job as a summer clerk and then you got promoted to senior, then you got and there was a very clear structure. If I do X, Y, and Z, this many billable hours, I will get the next chip on the shoulder. And
Yep.
to realize that actually that hasn't worked out. I've hit a dead end here. I need to find another path. That was really hard. And I actually got a business coach, some personal coaching, and that helped me to understand that, in fact, I did have some strengths and just that I was measuring myself against the way that people I saw, people that I worked for, a lot of men who had a different way of business development that didn't fit my natural way of working. And once I got a bit clearer on that I actually had some strengths, I could lean into those. And it turned out that I could do business networking. I could do social media. I could do things, but I had to do it my way, in a way that was authentic to me. And I think having that coaching gave me a bit of help just to realize that just because the way I'd seen modeled, there wasn't only one way, and to give me a bit of support to try and do things differently.
Yeah, we talk about unlearning the rules. And so there's
Yeah.
sort of rules that we have internalized along the way. We're not quite even sure where necessarily from. Maybe it's society, maybe it's just our other colleagues, maybe it's ourselves, maybe it's our family, who really knows? But at some point, we've internalized this whole set of rules and we kind of blindly follow them without really questioning it. And then when you get to this stage where you think, this doesn't feel right anymore, there's quite a process then of unlearning a whole heap of those rules that were really maybe holding you back, or I guess defining the direction that you felt that you could go in. And so it's really interesting to hear that you thought, I needed to get a coach, because that helps you sometimes give a bit more of an objective view of yourself, doesn't it?
And I remember, maybe it was $3,000 or something, extortionate amount of money, waste of money. I didn't need to spend that amount of money on myself, and when I think back now and for what that gave to me and the improvement in my levels of happiness and my health and, all the options that I opened up, it was a fraction of the value I got. But at the time, I remember thinking, oh, this is a complete waste of time to spend $3,000 to talk to someone about myself. But
Yeah.
I'm such a wholehearted fan of coaching now. If anybody who is thinking this is not work, whatever I'm doing is not working, or whatever I did to get here is not going to get me to the next thing, a coach just can bring so much to help you to actually. It's not cheating. It's not that you failed. It's smart. It's just learning instead of learning all those beginner lessons. Just like in a performance athlete, they're always looking for how can I improve what I'm doing. I'm good here, but how can I improve?
Yeah, and investing in yourself, isn't it? It's about that belief
Yeah.
that investing in yourself is worth doing. Did you experience pushback from colleagues or family or people who were saying to you, "What are you doing? What you got a good job. What are you doing?"
Oh, look, my father still thinks I would have been much better off. But I did make peace with it that that was not the thing for me, no matter what
Mm.
he thought. Um, I it's funnily enough, I haven't had a lot of people, and they may have been thinking it, but I never asked them, and they never bothered to tell me to my face. So I just sort of set about doing this, and I did do it really incrementally. And so it wasn't ever like somebody sort of said, you've quit your job and you've got nothing to go to. I was such a risk adverse person that was never something that I was comfortable enough doing. And so I was just gradually picking up more skills and gradually moving into different paths.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that can feel lonely, but maybe that was reduced by the fact that you had a coach and there was someone cheerleading you a bit on the sidelines as well to encourage you along.
Well, and funnily enough, you say that, because the other thing that I found that was so instrumental was a group of lawyers. It's called the Happy Lawyer, Happy Life Club. It's started by a family lawyer in Queensland, but it was a group of entrepreneurial lawyers who were like, this way is not working for us. We want to try different things. And being surrounded by a group of, about 100 lawyers who were prepared to try value pricing, try collaborative family law, work remotely. I mean, a lot of those things have become more common now, but back when they were quite new and unusual.
Yeah.
That also was super instrumental to me in having the confidence to say, um, you don't, being a lawyer doesn't have to be involved being miserable, because so many of the lawyers that were in my network just accepted that they were going to have a headache at the end of the day, that they were always going to be stuck behind a desk and not doing enough of the things they enjoyed doing. And so to hang out with a group of women who said, no, I'm going to be a dance mum, for every school holidays. I'm going to make work fit around the side of that. I mean, whatever your thing was, just fitting that into your life, but still having a high performing, profitable business, seeing that that was actually possible was a huge
Mm.
part in terms
Yeah.
of me keeping on going.
It's very much about surrounding yourself with the tribe, isn't it? Because when
Yeah.
you've got such heavy messaging from society and the profession and a lot of people who you might still be working closely with in your role, it can be really difficult to break out of that. But I think if you can find that tribe of people who are singing from the same song sheet, then it becomes a bit easier, doesn't it, to sort of make the decisions that you feel like you have to make, but sometimes aren't always strong enough to make them by yourself.
And there's a thing about change management there, and it's something that comes out of Alcoholics Anonymous. When you don't have enough faith that you can change, if you're surrounded by people who are on that same path, you can borrow their faith for long enough for it to become something that you actually start to see. Because for a long time, nothing's happening. And you're thinking, is this going to work? Is this going to work? And you can say, well, so and so did it, and they're still eating. So there must be a way to run these businesses and get paid and be okay. So that really helped. And the other thing I did in that group too was be part of a mastermind, which was a 12-month program. And again, just having that time away from, I'm running this fledgling business, huge ups and downs in pay. Should I just quit and go and get a job?
Mm.
And so having a group of people who were all in that same ups and downs of small business, and other people see things that you can't see once you're stuck in the weeds. And the other reason that I was really enjoyed being part of that mastermind is it meant that I didn't have to keep on whinging to my long suffering wife, and there was somebody else that I could go and talk to without having to always lean on the same person. So that was really helpful, and that's
Got
another
it.
thing that I really recommend.
And so you did those 3 years, I think you said, where you were really kind of in the trenches and figuring out how you were going to reinvent yourself. And then what happened? Like, tell us a bit more
Yeah.
about them. Yeah.
So I left my full-time employment and took a job in a new law firm and working part-time. And then from there I sort of became a freelance lawyer. And so I was working still in disputes, but for different businesses. I worked in-house in financial services. I went back and worked for a mid-tier firm. And I'd sort of started, while I was at that small firm, I'd sort of started to see how useful technology could be, simply because there wasn't anybody else to do the work, and we were running these big pieces of litigation. And with e-discovery software, I could run it, even though I didn't have a team of paralegals. But as I kept moving around as a freelance lawyer, I kept seeing there was this tech around, but all these lawyers were too busy to know how to use it. I thought that actually somebody needs to help them. So I went back to the College of Law and I did a graduate diploma and a master's of legal business. So studied innovation, change management, lots of strategic business sort of subjects with that legal lens. And I started hanging out with the Centre of Legal Innovation. There's a community and a community of business owners who were trying these new ways. And I thought, there's lots of good stuff here. There's lots of good lessons about digital transformation that lawyers can learn from other businesses. We don't have to all make all these beginner lessons ourselves, but it's hard to get access to it. And so I decided to write a book that was just writing down all the things that I'd learnt and all the things that I thought somebody who was a law firm owner in Australia probably needed to know.
Mm.
And again, I got a coach for that book, so that if I hadn't had that coach, I would still probably be talking about writing a book. But it, having that coach helped me to be really clear about how this was going to drive my business, who the target audience was, and come up with a structure and how I was going to promote it, what I was going to do with it, and having a professional editor. I was supposed to write 40,000 words. I wrote 100,000 words. He cut it back to 50,000 words. Anyway, so did that. And I know I also really worked hard on being a more effective public speaker. It was something that I was really terrified of doing. I did some courses at NIDA. I took every opportunity, and being part of those networks, those people gave me opportunities to speak. And I just knew that was a skill I needed to have. Over time, I built up, along the sides of still doing the dispute work, I got this book, and I was starting to get more and more opportunities in the tech evangelism space. And so I started to build out a tech consulting business around the side of that paid work. And then I was able to gradually just stop doing the paid work and full-time support myself as a legal tech consultant.
It's such a great story, right? Because would you have imagined when, went to that workshop and thought, what am I doing? That, however many years down the track, you'd be running a tech consultancy and be an author of a book. Did that ever
No,
occur to you as something that you
never.
might do? Never.
No, and I never occurred to me that I would be a small business owner and that I would be self-employed. That just was so far from anything I had ever seen.
Mm.
And I'm so proud now when I go to conferences and people come up and say nice things about my book or that they've seen the webinar and it's just like, I'm so pleased that I've been able to be useful. And I feel that as a litigation lawyer, a lot of the time I was telling people that they were going to,
Mm.
run these terrible lawsuits and they were going to be stuck in them for years and it was going to take longer and they wouldn't be happy with the outcome. Whereas I feel with this work that I'm doing now, I'm actually able to have a positive impact on the profession and also the community that the profession serves. So I feel like I'm in a much better place.
Yeah. Does it feel like your relationship with success has changed, how you define success?
It absolutely did. And that was another thing that took a long while, but I had to get really comfortable with defining success. And I was quite nervous of going back to some of the people I'd worked with. And I was like, they're gonna say that if I was any good, I would have stuck it out and I'd be a partner at a law firm. And so I've got nothing to add to them. But I had to come to terms with that and say, no, I chose this path. I'm much healthier. I'm much happier. I've got time to look after my parents who needed some extra help. I've got time to do the things that interest me. Um, I've got, I think, a life that suits me. And no, I may not have the giant house by the harbour or whatever, those sort of things that come with the lifestyle I thought I was going to have. But I did have to come to terms with the fact that what suits me is something different and
Mm.
that this is
I mean,
enough.
yeah. Well, and that was going to be my next question is have you also changed the way that you define enough? You know, what you thought enough was before versus what you think enough was now. Has that changed?
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I mean, there's been some patches with growing your own business where you don't, have a steady income stream, and you do sort of realize, oh, okay, some of the things that I just used to spend money on dry cleaning or, you know, fast food or what, takeaway, whatever it was, you're like, oh, actually don't need that anymore. Don't need to live close to the city. There are lots of things that you think your lifestyle just has to have. But once you get more comfortable with your definition of success, and maybe having a smaller footprint, it can be more sustainable.
I think one of the things that I struggled with a lot was this question of what's enough and when is enough. And, you know, you sort of climb this corporate ladder and it's a constantly moving thing that you're trying to reach. You know, you think when you do the next thing, then that will be enough and you'll think that you're successful, but then you do that and then you go, oh, well, I now better do this thing. And so I wonder if anyone ever reaches the point where they go, okay, it's enough when they're on that traditional sort of career path, or if in fact, yeah, it is much more holistic way of thinking really around, well, what is it that I need to be enough as a person, which includes a whole heap of considerations. And only a small percentage of those is around your career.
Yeah, yeah. There's always more you could be doing. So it can be it's one of the things that's part of the community that I'm in now is that thinking with a mindset of there's enough work for everyone. I don't have to be out there chasing everything down and in competition with fellow practitioners. I can be a bit more collaborative and a bit more generous. And I've been so pleasantly surprised by people along the path who've been so kind to come and talk to me and give me a bit of a hand or shine a bit of a light when I was stuck and with nothing to gain from that. So I think that that's another thing that when you are on that path of reinvention, it's so easy to think everybody else has got it all worked out and that they're going to judge you for being a bit confused or being curious about options. Whereas I just found that when you ask people, they were so generous in sharing what they knew, what options they saw. And so I guess that would be another thing I would encourage is if you're curious about what something else looks like, find someone who's doing what you think might be interesting and go and talk to them about what it's like. And I think in most cases they'll be willing to have that conversation with you.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because we make assumptions about how competent we think other people are and how
Mm,
sure they are. And we assume that people have got it all sorted out. And in fact, it's only us that don't have it sorted out. And so we often sit alone in that, don't we? And then, in fact, when you do reach out, it seems to be the same story for everyone. You know, you hear very few people who decide after a long professional career in one particular field, oh, you know, I was very clear and I did this, this, and this, and it was all fine. There's self-doubt for everyone, which is always made better, I think, when that's shared.
I think so too.
Yeah, we're just so busy, I guess, probably feeling like we're not doing the best job that we can because we're all perfectionists and, you know, looks like Fiona's doing that much better than I might do that. And, oh, I can't ask her because she's clearly very competent, but sounds like you got a great deal of benefit from just reaching out and like lots of people were willing to chat.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also just that once you get, it's like a muscle, once you get into that idea of thinking, I don't know what the next step is, or I don't know how to do this. But if you get comfortable asking and you get to trust, actually, I'll be able to work it out, and it becomes much less scary. But that was definitely one of the things that I found moving away from such a traditional, there was just for so long, I thought there was just one way to success. And if you didn't become a judge, you hadn't got it there. But being able to understand what impact you could have, and be grateful for what opportunities that was giving you, made it so much easier to say, oh, well, I don't know how to do that yet, but I'll work it out.
I wanted to ask you about, can you think of one particular belief that you had about yourself that you had to let go of?
Yeah, for a long time, I thought that I was no good at business development, and I had a very rigid idea of what a rainmaker looked like, and that they were the sort of person that would go into a great big room full of people and come out with business. And um, I I realized that that was just not my way of working. I'm much more of a relationship builder, and I like to be generous and trust that that will come back to me in time, and largely it has. But that was very different to the and perhaps I'd been hanging around with too many sharp Sydney litigators, but that was not a model that I'd seen used very much. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think I think when you're starting out, you sometimes latch onto the, oh, I can't do X until I've got $15,000 to spend on X, Y, and Z. And in fact, if you just start, some of those beliefs do end up just falling away.
I like that idea. Just start. Again, I think we often believe that everything has to be worked out before we start. And when you sort of read books or you hear the great, entrepreneurs of the world and problem solvers of the world, it's just really just start, because you discover so much as you go along, don't you? That you didn't even think about really before you'd started. And so I think you're right. It's so important to start, but there is an element of courage that people need to step into that space, which is why it's so great having conversations like this, because then everyone can hear that, yeah, no one really knew what they were doing when they started. And it was just about stepping into some space that maybe felt right on some kind of level and then seeing where it was that the path led.
And I do think if you are that person that is, like me, really risk adverse, look for a way that you can make a change that doesn't scare you. You know what I mean? If you try to make a change and just quit cold turkey, that actually may really impact your ability to pay the mortgage, and so that's not an option. But what path can you find that gets you closer to something different that doesn't involve jumping off a cliff? I mean, sometimes you do need some help to be pushed off a cliff, but it's always I think it's helpful to have given yourself, some wings before you decide to get pushed off a cliff.
Yeah, because my next question was going to be, what's one small step that someone could take today if they were feeling stuck? So that sounds like your answer to that question, is it?
It is, but also, and I'm going to say, because I spend a lot of time talking to lawyers about technology, that the opportunities, if you get your head around how we can work in tech-enabled ways, that is going to be such a valuable skill that if I was feeling stuck, there are going to be so many more really good careers in legal operations. If you've got any interest in that whatsoever, and there are quite a lot of people who, like to put things into organized processes and systems,
Mm.
that that is just going to be absolute gold mine of opportunity. So if you have any interest that way, lean into that.
Mm. That's great advice, I think, because yeah, I often hear that from lawyers who say, well, what else can I do?
Yeah.
I'm a lawyer, I've done this. And it's quite difficult. And again, I don't think this is specific to just law, all sorts of professions where you see what it is that you do in quite a straight line and you don't realize all of the other skills that you've picked up along the way. And so it is so important to be able to identify those and then figure out how it is that you might be able to apply them in different situations that maybe isn't in exactly the same way that you've been working before. As
And I
we do
think
learn
that's where,
these skills.
yeah, and that's where talking to people who have other jobs can actually really help you, just to say, what is it that you actually do? Would this work for me?
That's also really great advice, I think, because if you only talk to people who do the same job as you, they have that same quite narrow focus. That's how they understand their jobs as well. Whereas when you get into a conversation with people who don't know really anything about you, what you do, they are often the ones that will come up with these kind of clarity moments, isn't it? To go, but you'd be good at that as well, aren't you? And you go, yeah, I probably am actually. One of those things for me was around communication and writing emails. That we do that all day, every day as lawyers. Okay, I was reasonable at it. But when I left lawyering and started having conversations with people about different things that I could do, they said, you're an incredible communicator, the way you write things and, have you thought about doing something like that? And I thought, am I? Like, that was just part of my job, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's great advice, to seek out people who are outside of your profession, outside of your, which can be hard, right? Because that tends to be
Mm.
where your networks are. But you can start with family and friends. And, once you kind of get the word out there, I think you're right. When people hear that you want to talk to someone, often these connections sort of come out of the woodwork a bit, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. And, there can be lots of loose connections that you can expand on.
Yeah, exactly. So, last question. Do you think that this change cost you anything? And if it did, and I don't mean financially, I mean more broadly than that, and if it did, do you feel like it was worth it?
Look, I suppose if I'm being really honest, I do feel that part of me thinks that Fiona, the lawyer, had a particular I don't know. I do feel there was a sort of a status attached to that. And it took a long while for me to feel just as proud of being Fiona, author, speaker, consultant. Um, so yeah, I would say it did cost, um, it do feel that it's totally worthwhile, but yeah, I absolutely see that it was a change to my sense of who I was that
Yeah.
um, and it was such a gradual process, but I held on to that a long while because I really did value that.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. And I wonder if it's something that you ever let go of. I think that it's maybe an ongoing process, and also because
Mm,
we still just constantly railing against this definition of what success is as per society's view. And so
yeah,
whilst we can feel much more at peace within ourselves, and we know that the choices that we've made to get ourselves where we are making us a much healthier person and a more rounded person, and kind of feeling in alignment with whatever it is that we want, and that's going to be different for everyone, obviously, but still there's all of those messages out there all of the time. And so it's kind of this constant thing where you've got to be pushing back against those messages, which I guess is partly why we wanted to start this podcast, really, because
yeah,
you kind of, like you were saying, is it's around creating that movement, really, to get people to go, well, I don't know, there's lots of people who've stepped away from that and are much happier. And actually, can we push back on this idea of that successful can only mean one thing, which is this massive career that might take a lot from you personally, and then you feel as though you're missing things in other parts of your life.
yeah.
Been so great to chat to you and to hear about that. Kate hates the word journey, but I'm going to use the word journey because I feel like it is a journey. Until I come up with a different word, I'm just going to keep using it, really. But I feel like it is such a path, maybe we'll say path, but such a path that people do have to traverse when they make big decisions like this. And it's easy to look at people who've done it and go, oh, well, they've done it and that was easy for them. And we don't always necessarily talk about how difficult it is. So I really appreciate you talking frankly about that and telling us what helped and the challenges that you came along the way, and so that people know that that's completely normal to have some of those challenges and just part of the journey, I suppose, that you have to go through when you're doing this. Nothing's easy. There's no easy ways.
And I think that's right, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you again. Thank you for listening to
Pleasure.
the podcast today, the Outlaws podcast. We would love it if you would follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or whatever it is that you find your podcasts. And look, if you've got ideas about what might be useful for us to talk about or people that you would like us to hear talking to, please send us an email. All of the contact details are on our website. So thank you again, Fiona. It's been a real pleasure. we'll put in the show notes about your book and how people can find you in case they also want to get their business tech enabled.
Happy to
Thank
chat
you.
about it anytime. Thanks.
Super. Thank you.